Hello and welcome. It's time for some more bonus materials from Westeros.org, and this time it is for our review and recap of episode 4, Oathkeeper. Today, Elio is going to be discussing the slave trade in Essos, and then we are going to move on to our new format style commentary on the episode, which means that we will essentially comment on each and every major storyline of the episode, and then finish off by giving a briefer look at what our highs and lows were.
So, discussing the slave trade in Essos, I kind of think I may have done one last season discussing this. It's worth discussing again, because obviously the cities that Dany has been, attacked at first, Astapor and Ukai, are part of the sort of Giscari culture, the civilization that were once the old empire, which used to control a large part of Essos, and they were an empire that was built in part on sort of taking slaves, winning territory and taking slaves and using slaves. They were defeated by the Valyrians, and eventually I think they became something of a backwater. And I think what essentially happens, this is to some degree speculation on my part, is that they essentially, with the fields being sort of sown with salt and bones by the Valyrians, I think they ended up being established as sort of a hub of slavery, who kept feeding sort of the insatiable freehold's desire for slaves. The freehold was very big in slavery. The Valyrians were very much slavers, using slaves to mine things. So I think that's how they kind of made their niche. And then when the Doom happened, and Valyria kind of disappeared, there was a lot of chaos, but I think that actually helped them sort of establish themselves as this independent place where anyone could come and get slaves, could sell slaves, could trade slaves. They became sort of the international center of slavery.
Hence why it's Slaver's Bay, the area around there. So it's
even the leaders, and the leaders of all the cities are the masters, or the wise masters, or the good masters, or the great masters as they're called in Meereen, because Meereen is supposed to be the greatest of these three slaver cities. Slavery is big in Essos. Pretty much every culture in Essos, the eastern continent, practices it. Braavos is actually the only free city which very clearly is opposed to it. Pentos, at the time of the novels, actually has been forced by treaty not to have slaves, but Illyrio kind of gets away with it. The rich men get away with it. They kind of have slaves that they don't call slaves.
They call them servants, but they basically
have callers, and they're slaves.
Yeah.
Everywhere else is very much into them. And where do the slaves come from? Well, we see in this episode they come from all over the world, basically. There are even slaves from Westeros, people who were, unlucky enough to end up being sold by a unlawful sale by a lord, for example. That's what Jorah Mormont did. A passing slaver, he sold some poachers and criminals, basically, and then he got in trouble because Westeros forbids it. You also have people, sailors who get caught at sea by pirates, and so on. So slavery is big. It's all over, and it's sort of a major part of the economy of Essos.
And if you look at a place like Lys, for example, it's all about breeding pleasure slaves in particular, and beautiful slaves. So it's a huge part of their culture, breeding in particular these Valyrian-looking slaves and filling their own pleasure houses and pleasure gardens with it, and also selling them on as well. So.
And then you have, like each of the slaver cities, Astapor specialized in creating the Unsullied. And Yunkai was supposed to be sort of a place focused on training bed slaves, sex slaves, basically. And Meereen is supposed to be famous for, among other things, its sort of fighting slaves, its gladiatorial slaves, basically, which we don't hear about yet. I have no idea if they're keeping it. I expect they will. But that is a big part of that society. So what Dany has done has been very disruptive. She's basically taken out or seriously impacted the slave training, the slave producing, the slave selling capabilities of this major central hub, and that's going to have a ripple effect through the economies of...
It would be like walking into the Roman Empire and taking over there and deciding, hey, no more slavery. It would have complications.
Yeah. So, discussing scene by scene, let's discuss who we see. The first thing is Grey Worm and Missandei.
Yes.
I like this scene. This is an invented scene. The one thing that struck me on second viewing is it reminded me very much of the Ricaro and Eerie scenes from the first season.
I think that perhaps that they felt that they needed one of those relationships again after they lost those characters, and having some among Dany's followers and her close followers who have relationships that are independent of her.
And it certainly is a scene that it's an interesting scene because I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. I mean, remember what the Unsullied are? They are these sort of slave soldiers who part of their creation process is turning them into eunuchs, completely unmanning them as its root and stem, I believe, is the lovely phrase used in the books. But it's clear that despite that, he still feels attraction for Missandei, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But here you have a little subtle moment where she's talking to him about being taken away from Noth, the island that she's from, and he actually his hand inches towards her and very briefly touches her, and she pulls away. It's a very interesting thing having this sort of depicting a romantic desire on his part that doesn't necessarily work in sort of normal relationships. The sexual component is fairly limited.
Yeah.
I find that interesting. I don't mind when they flesh out characters.
No, and they use it also to introduce a little bit of backstory, sort of mentioning Noth and mentioning
the Summer Isles as well.
The Summer Isles, so
it works pretty well. And the other thing, of course, and the main purpose, I guess, is the foreground slavery. Grey Worm's anger. It killed the masters. He wants to end them. So it foregrounds it because right after that we rush into the attack. Well, not the attack, the infiltration, I should say, of Meereen. Now, this is very different from a novel. After Oznak Zopal, the champion, is killed, they settle in for a siege. That's actually a more difficult situation that Dany is in. And there she has siege engines, she has ships to block the river, a few ships anyways. But she has a problem of, that the masters kind of burned all the fields and so on, so there's very little forage to work on. So she has all these mouths to feed, so there's an urgency to it, and it's a complication. I think it's a matter of the timing that they have and the budget. Like, there's a lot happening later this season. I don't think they could afford to do a long stretch out siege. And what is in the novels an infiltration that is much more feature central characters. Jorah and Barristan are actually directly involved in it in the book, and the circumstances, of course, with them are completely different, absolutely different. So I don't want to go too far into.
No.
Someone brought up to us the possibility, like how do we deal with spoilers, like, because we want to inform people who haven't necessarily read the books. At the same time, we don't want to dumb it down or shy away from important details.
I think that including future details when we're pretty certain that they won't be included is one thing. In this case, there are developments with Jorah and with Barristan.
With Barristan we can share, of course.
Yes, with Barristan, those aren't going to happen.
Which is namely that in the books, obviously, up to this point, he's Arstan Whitebeard.
He hasn't revealed himself. And when the reveal happens, Dany is, because of other circumstances, quite hurt by it. And so she ends up basically mistrusting him for a time, and he ends up having to be part of this expedition because she... As a punishment, basically.
She's angry.
Yeah, she's angry.
It's clearly depicted as they're not going in to kind of bring weapons to the slaves already there. They're going to, they're going to try and open the gates, and yes, at the same time, try and free slaves to incite them to revolt, but it's going to be a much more direct action rather than being here where it feels almost like, oh, they killed the one master in the city, and suddenly it's theirs. It's a little complicated. I mean...
It's obviously highly simplified.
It's highly simplified. I think it works pretty well altogether. I mean, it's a change that's needed because you can tell, like, they can't afford doing more.
Yeah.
So that's how it is. It is a production. It is one that has to kind of balance the needs of the story, the needs of
and
the
they
reality.
do use the element which is that as a slaver city, there are many more slaves in the city than, as they point out, for each master and for each free person. So that is the danger of if somebody's able to organize the slaves or even incite a large enough slave revolt, you are going to be able to overtake this sort of city if there's a little bit of backing and a little bit of planning, because there are so many slaves, and that is certainly a factor in
It's
the
absolutely a
novels
factor.
as well. The
Yeah.
fact that the slaves outnumber the free
And I like the
people.
one touch that they have there, which is something that George is never explicit about, but I don't think he felt he needed to be explicit, but there have been slave revolts in the past. I mean, a slave-holding society will have fairly regular issues with slave revolts, minor or major. They will happen. George never directly discusses it. So, but it's just, I think he just assumes as a matter of course. Of course, when you have enough slaves, you're occasionally going to try and get away. But as I say, we don't have weapons. We have there are slaves who are too scared.
Yeah,
who will
it
turn
takes
against
unique
us.
circumstances for them to succeed. You need your Spartacus.
Yeah, you need a Spartacus. You need someone like Grey Worm to come in and say, "Look, I was a slave. I was an Unsullied, and look at me now. I fight for her against the masters. You can do it too if you're armed, but you have to take it yourself." I think that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
Obviously, then after that, Dany takes over the city. And obviously, the punishment she metes out is exactly what she does in the books. She avenges the children by making an example of 163 of the masters. I am a little bothered by that last closing shot, though.
Yes. I don't actually, off the top of my head, remember exactly if the line, "I will repay injustice with justice," is exactly from the books, but it seems to fit at least.
I'm certainly fits
close.
what Dany's opinion is. She has revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, they softened her in Astapor, because in the novel, in Astapor, when she wins the Unsullied, she tells them, kill every master in their outfit. They wear the tokars, which are basically togas, but to mark out the masters from the slaves. And says, any master in a tokar over the age of 12, I think, kill them. So she's killing people who are clearly children. Even by Westerosi standards, 12-year-old is a child. I think by Dothraki standards and by Dany standards, these are still children. But she basically is saying, we have to wipe out this group of people who are raised in this culture of slaveholding. And it's quite a shocking thing. And a lot of people will hold it up as like an example of how the Targaryen nature in her includes the capacity for atrocity. For doing some really harsh things with her
may
anger.
be part of the reason that we get this final shot here. So they dropped that in Astapor, and instead we get here a very sinister final shot with the
screams in the background.
Screams in the background, and this very sort of monumental look at Dany looking down on the city, and then the black and red Targaryen banner having been draped over the harpy and flying up there. It's
you remember the words, fire and blood. You think fire and blood, like this is what she might be bringing this to the city.
I think that the problem with this in comparison with Astapor is that it's so much about the imagery here that it's not necessarily on Dany's decisions in the moment, which she does in Astapor, where she feels that, okay, we have to wipe out these people. But here, there is almost a, Leni Riefenstahl feel to it. This sort of
I could see
dictator,
sort of tyrant
looking down. It's a very
it's a dark scene. It's
very
sort of ambiguous, and it's full of foreboding, like making you think like maybe her ruling the city wasn't the right choice. It's a place that's too awash in the blood of past slaves. Too much.
I'm not sure they should have gone there right now.
Yeah, it feels a little early.
It feels a little early.
Certainly, at least if they cut away, I think if there had been music that had felt a little bit more triumphant, and they had cut away from the screams. Yeah, I think, but they're clearly trying to play up
because she doesn't look troubled either. There is really no.
I don't want to go into whether she looks something. She's not bothered, I guess.
No,
but she's just looking down the city, and that alone. Yeah. Pulling the camera back and down, she's retreating from the common people. Yeah. She was among Misa, and now she's alone at the pinnacle looking down.
Which fits well with some of the developments later on, absolutely.
It seems that that's the thing, if they've hurried up this aspect, we are now going to be going into a Dance of Dragons territory, basically. And it seems clear to me that what we're going to have is
But I'm concerned that they will pull back a little bit again from it, perhaps. We'll see. Basically, we'll have to see how it plays out.
Well, it can't be a constant. I don't think it has to be a constant rise up. But I think this is the first premonition.
Yeah.
I think it's a foreshadowing.
But it's a little strong as a premonition.
It is a little strong. It's a little too obvious. But as a foreshadowing, kind of saying, well, so that's it. I think it works fine in the end. It's a little tonally. I think it's a little
jarring.
Too much. It's a little jarring.
Yeah.
After that, Bronn and Jaime, a very different scene with a bit more, a little lighthearted to begin with. Really well written. I think interaction between the two characters. I thought. I do wonder if we're supposed to take out of it that Jaime, because Jaime's suddenly becoming very confident and maybe overly confident, of course, and doing a little twirl with his sword, and obviously Bronn beats him. But are we supposed to take out of it? Oh yeah, he's really getting a lot better if he's so confident to do little tricks and
which
flourishes.
Would be a big change. From
it is a big change. He's going to be a mediocre swordsman with his left hand. He just doesn't have the feel. He's not ambidextrous by nature. He's not going to figure it out. So if they're really supposed to make him suddenly, I don't know.
Certainly, it's not going to happen in a few months or a few weeks anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe if Jaime had 10 years to practice, he,
Yeah.
If Qhorin Halfhand could do it, then
sure he could, but it's more of it takes a long time, and I just don't know if they're rushing to him, or if it's Bronn sort of. I mean, Bronn must be holding back, but does Jaime realize it when he's doing a little trick, or does he? Oh yeah, starting to feel like how I used to.
Yeah.
I wish it was clearer, but he's saying it's not.
Yeah.
I'm a long way from where I was.
Yeah.
Love the reference of bringing it to the Vale and saying, he wanted to call you his champion.
Yeah.
Great stuff, actually. I thought really on the mark, on the nose for those characters. Really kind of getting it across how Jaime feels about Tyrion, how Tyrion loves his brother, trusts his brother to save him, and Bronn saying, well,
why haven't you seen him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that obviously then leads to Jaime and Tyrion. First thing, minor, but one of the first things out of Tyrion's mouth is, the whole country thinks it's a kingdom. It is a kingdom.
Yeah.
I don't understand what the objection of the writers is.
I translated it as that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, at least.
Hopefully no one will object.
I just don't understand. Country is such a word that feels so modern.
Yeah.
Why be modern when you don't have to be? It annoys me. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Silly, I know. So the content is I think it's fine.
I have a little problem with the tone of it.
You felt a little too light?
A little too light.
I think
but I'm having a general problem with Dinklage's tone as Tyrion in this season.
He's exasperated, he's frustrated, he's scared.
Yeah. I just think that because of all their whitewashing of Tyrion in general, I mean, as we have in the previous scene where Bronn points out that Tyrion is not a murderer, whereas in the books he has in fact asked Bronn to commit murder on his behalf at this point.
More than once, actually. He's had been murdered more than once so far. So yes, it is quite a change to say, oh, he's not a murderer. Well, on the show he isn't. In the books he is.
He's much more ruthless in the novels.
He's more ruthless in defense of himself and the ones he loves.
And for petty reasons.
For those who haven't read the books, he has Alar Deem, this one of Slint's cronies, who is actually in the books is the guy who actually kills Robert's little infant bastard. He tells them, and if he should happen to be washed overboard while we're sailing up the wall, I won't shed any tears. So he's basically make sure they throw him over. And then he has Simon Silvertongue, this bard who ends up becoming familiar with Shay and figures out what's going on and basically tries to blackmail Tyrion. And Tyrion basically says, yeah, take Simon Silvertongue, tell him we're going to pay him, and then kill him. And what do I do with the body? It's like, well, there's always bowls of brown.
Yeah.
Like, sell it to one of the pot shops to be cut up and to meat that he sell to the peasants.
Yum.
It's a really dark
quite
Tyrion when you have it. It's quite callous and it's quite violent that he's willing to do these things. And it's fine in the context like it's justice for this guy, a child murderer, and
he'll do anything to protect Shay
and himself.
Yeah.
But they are part of that character, and this character in the TV show doesn't have it. So a lot of people have sort of said, Tyrion's a saint and so on, and it feels a little too much. And obviously, I think they may be doing it to make contrast for later, perhaps, and make him seem much higher, and then bring him down.
But that's not necessarily a good thing. Because what I feel here is that because we have this whitewashed Tyrion. We also have a less conflicted, less traumatized, and sort of generally hurt Tyrion.
And less
And
interesting.
I don't, because there isn't that undercurrent of bitterness, I find that the material comes across as too light.
Yeah.
Because it should be contrasted with the fact that he has this anger inside of him, and I don't really feel it coming out.
And to go to the next scene, actually, we have another person who is said, oh, there's no way they could kill somebody, which is different from novels, because Tyrion, of course, says Sansa, there's no way she could have been involved, and Jamie's telling her, like, she's like a prime suspect. Do you think it's coincidence she disappeared? In the books, he actually thinks that he's the one who says, yeah, she has more motive than most to want Joffrey dead. How she got the poison, he figures someone must have helped her, but it's not beyond him to think that she might have poisoned Joffrey. I mean, let's remember, she was this close to pushing Joffrey off the walls to try and
obviously
kill him
in a moment of absolute despair and desperation where she was planning to kill herself. But yes, if she, I think a planned murder
might be a little much, but still,
Tyrion,
they pull back a little bit. But so we go to Sansa and Littlefinger, and this sort of combines a later scene from the books into one, where he basically leads her to some degree through figuring out what was going on, which I thought was quite interesting. And I like the scene. I think Sophie comes off very pensive when she's thinking as Sansa, and so I may have. I mean,
I had just read those chapters when I watched it as well, and this is one where I definitely do prefer the internal, where Sansa is working it out. She works out a lot more for herself. Obviously, that is internal dialogue, but I think, again, it sells her a little short, even though they do try to have her at least reason through a couple of the things here. Like she says that, you wouldn't trust Dantos, and, I know it's not Tyrion, but that's more sort of a gut feeling that she has. But, no, it's not. I warmed to it a little bit more after watching it again. The only problem is, again, the many accents of Littlefinger. It would have been nice if they could stick with one.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know. I don't know what to. I haven't.
And he's again too obvious. The whole "what do you want?" Everything.
Well, no, this is absolutely true. I have this on. I have a note on this that he is. They've always been much clearer about what he wants.
Yeah.
When he's staring at the throne and everything, he wants everything, and he's ambitious. And
I'm just glad he doesn't have a mustache that he twirls. But
well, he is very ambitious, and he may have designs on eventually being the power behind the throne. So, but it's just it lays it on thick when he just comes out and says that I wish let her figure it out.
Yeah.
Let her say you'll have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, of course, is to what degree is he eliding some of the truth, which some will say that he's interested in her in particular. He scuttled the attempts to get Sansa out of the city that the Tyrells had initially intended to do, to get her married off to Loras. Littlefinger is directly involved in revealing that to the Lannisters and stopping it. So it mattered to him where Sansa was. It matters to him that he gets a hold of her.
And this is more or less the same in the novels, except of course there's not Loras that she's going to be married to. She would be married to Loras' older brother, the heir to Highgarden and Willis, who doesn't exist on the show.
So clear about the ambitions, and I think the main thing I like about the scene, which I think is a little addition, is where he talks about risk. That some men won't risk anything, and he'll risk everything for what he wants. I like this because this is a very correct depiction. He is a gambler.
Yeah.
He is taking some big risks. I mean, when he goes and decides to tell Catelyn, that knife belonged to Tyrion, he doesn't exactly know where Tyrion is. He doesn't know if Tyrion's going to be showing up in the city in a couple of days. He doesn't quite know everything. He's making a wild guess that he can get away with this. And he can get what he wants. He can convince the Starks to trust him so he can worm his way into their confidences. He's going to be able to make sure that the dagger stays out of play because he'll convince them, you can't really use it. He does all these things with the intention of fomenting chaos. And I mean, that speech from last season, chaos is a ladder.
And also the comment he makes here about, keeping people off guard by not having a motive necessarily for what he does.
Yeah, a little undercut though, because then he then provides a motive for why Joffrey being out of the way was actually something that he wanted.
True, but the sentiment was...
The sentiment is right.
Yeah, and then a nice nod there to the Tyrell motto by saying that, a little gift is a good way of making a friendship grow stronger. So.
And then we segue to Olenna and Margaery, and this is one of Linda's least favorite scenes, as you can tell. It's never quite. I mean, Margaery's never really worked for you. Obviously.
No, I mean, I cannot. My hatred for Natalie Dormer's Margaery is only eclipsed by my hatred of Lena Headey's Cersei. I think it's such a horrible miscasting, and now this scene. First of all, we have this ridiculous anecdote from Olenna about how she ended up married to Luther Tyrell by apparently waltzing into his bedroom the evening before he was supposed to propose to her sister. Like that happens in Westeros like that, but okay. Apparently she wore the poor fellow out, and he wanted more of that. He just felt so... Yeah, I don't know, there's not words for it. It's supposed to be funny, I guess. And they wanted something for Diana Rigg, I guess. It feels so out of place, so juvenile, and I find it absolutely terrible. I find it very hard to have anything, there's nothing positive to say about it. And then you go on to saying that apparently just the whole bit where she says that, well, she was very, very good, and apparently Margaery is even better, and I don't want to know exactly how Olenna knows that Margaery is even better at fucking men senseless, but...
Well, I think what is intended, which we'll take it, is not that she's saying you're even better in bed than I am. I think she meant to say, I was really good at manipulating men. You're even better. So it's not necessarily talking just a sexual component.
Which is really strange, because prior to that, we had her revealing to Margaery that she was the one who poisoned Joffrey, which poor, sweet, dear, innocent Margaery had not had one idea about. So why on earth did they cast an older character, or an older actor, an aged up Margaery, so that she could have, more of a role in things, and still kept apparently her more naive than she probably is in the books?
Yes.
Because I don't think it's possible for Margaery in the books to be entirely, certainly after the Joffrey's death, I think she must know.
For sure, yeah.
Because Olenna is the one, I'm quite certain myself that Olenna is the one. She certainly takes the poison from Sansa's hairnet in the books, and she probably is the one who puts it into the cup as well. It seems most likely that she's able to do it. But then they either had some prearranged signal from Margaery saying, don't drink more than this, or they outright told her that, at this point we're gonna put a poison in the cup. That might have led to her not acting as convincingly as she did, but there was at some point they knew to tell her not to drink more.
Well, I did say that they might have told her, as I said, they could have just have told, don't drink too much, you don't want to be drunk on the wedding night.
No, absolutely, they could just have said that. But then afterwards, Marjorie's going to put that command together with the fact that Joffrey went and died after drinking. And unless she's very stupid, which I don't think she's supposed to be, she'd figure out that dear old grandmama had something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, in the very first chapter, Sansa's chapter in Storm of Swords, when she's brought to Olenna and Margaery, when Sansa finally admits, he's a monster, the bit that they have in the TV show is still there in the books. It's that both, granddaughter and grandmother share a look.
Yeah.
And, they're aware, and I think Margaery is, to some degree, at least a passive participant in what happened. George has not revealed it for sure, so we're not going to say that it's 100%.
No.
He could decide that, no, she had no clue. I think,
but
it's
then
very
they would have
dangerous.
been risking her.
They would have been risking her.
And I can't
but
see...
that said, he could go. He could go. So let's leave it at that and say that he could. But regardless, the character is fairly sharp in the book, despite
Yeah.
being a 16-year-old girl. Remember, a lot of these people are fairly young. George takes the idea that the Middle Ages, adolescence ends much more quickly. And Margaery,
she is a protege of her
grandmother. She's a protege. So that is absolutely true. She's had... Her grandmother has taken away a lot of illusions about how things work. I don't think, for example, Margaery is caught up in the idea like Sansa. She's not a Sansa character who believes in chivalry and true love and all these things. She's someone who's a bit more grounded in reality.
Yeah.
So that said, you have Natalie Dormer, who, when we see her in the second season, she's, negotiating or plotting a bit with Littlefinger.
And she really wants to be queen.
She really wants to be queen. You'd think she would at least have been thinking who did it. Like
yeah, and again, after that scene here, or in the same scene towards the end, then Olenna tells her that apparently she's even better than her at manipulating people. But she's apparently crap at reading people and understanding that her grandmother had anything to do with the murder. So it's inconsistent, and it's sort of characterization as for what the plot requires.
I think it's characterization in part. I think, if I were to think about it a bit, I mean, did they know they were having Olenna in the third season? Did they necessarily know what role she would have?
And then they pulled back on Margaery's involvement.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. I can't say because, and it seems convenient that now that they've set up this, now your goal is to get yourself married to Tommen.
Yeah.
It's your job to do it. I mean, now we have Olenna saying she's leaving.
Yeah.
So this may be the last we see of Diana Rigg this season, I think. So I think there is that idea that when Olenna is in place, she needs to be more of a player, which means they have to pull back on Margaery.
Yeah, but it's the idea that she's basically supposed to be borrowing Margaery's brain. Well, no, but
she's...
but you can't turn a character stupid just because another character...
I agree that if that's what they're doing, they're kind of being very clumsy about it. But, I mean, this isn't the only clumsy thing in this episode, which we'll get to later. The Night's Watch is next. Always a pleasure to be back. I so enjoy being back in the Castle Black set. Being among the Night's Watch, I think it works really well every time that they're there so far. I'm really liking the story progression. I'm really liking... part of it is just nostalgia for the first. I mean, I was on that set when they were filming, and it just brings back memories for me. So it just feels great.
Yes, you'll join the Night's Watch eventually.
Yes, thank you. And seeing Owen Teal as Alistair Thorne. We see Slint and Thorne scheming, which is kind of important here. We're just sort of trying to figure out how to get rid of Jon.
Yeah.
The challenge. Now, the interesting thing, one of the big changes, of course, is here that Thorne is acting Lord Commander, and Slint is backing him to the idea that you will eventually be Lord Commander unless Jon Snow gets in the way. He might become Lord Commander instead, which is, I think, the first real hint at elections. Did we mention them up to now? I don't think they have.
No, I don't think so. I think this is
so. I mean, the Night's Watch elects its leaders. Whenever a Lord Commander dies, they elect another one.
There's no question, I should say, in the books here that Jon is not a candidate that anyone considers.
No,
because it's completely out of the question that somebody is so raw and young.
Well, I can't say that. I mean, because we have very young commanders.
Yes,
but
in the
context of
there
the
being
books,
no other options.
There's the commander of Eastwatch, Cotter Pike. There's the commander of the Shadow Tower, Dennis Mallister, and there's Janos Slint. There's the reversal we have, where it's Thorne is clearly the focus here, and Slint is sort of advising and supporting him. Whereas in the novels, it's actually Slint who, because of his position as a former member of the Small Council, former commander of City Watch, a friend of the Lannisters, in some fashion. People think, they understand Tyrion didn't like him, but Tywin does, they figure. That gives them a lot of cash, and they think, like, well, if we elect him, the Lannisters will be likelier to help us. They'll be happier. I think there's even a bit where, Tywin even says, we should kind of tell them, but we will look very well on them if they elected our good friend Janos. And basically saying, and if you don't, well, we're going to be too busy to help you. So, but one of the problems, of course, is because of the time changes, like the election, like no one's talking about it. It's just, they're hinting at it, but there's no excuse. Like, right now is the perfect time to solidify your chain of command, decide who is the leader. But they don't want to do that because then Alistair Thorne is just far too obvious a choice, and it sort of changes the narrative a lot. So they're basically going with Thorne as the acting commander.
And the timeline is, like, we should stress, very, very changed on what they're doing on the wall.
They rushed, and then now we're delaying because... So it complicates it. But so they look past certain things. Locke, of course, has now wormed his way in. We remember in the second episode, he's sent up from the Red Fort.
And now he's among the recruits.
And knows how to fight.
With Jon.
I don't know about making him a Stormlander. Like, I don't... In the first season, they really had this whole thing of the Northmen had a particular accent and different from everyone else. They tried to... And obviously now the Dornish have a distinct accent from everyone else, but they were initially, I think, going to try and make accent differences clearer between different regions. I think they kind of pulled back. But somehow, and I always found this marvelous, I always thought Mark Addy seemed to have decided, well, Robert's going to sound like Ned.
Yeah.
And so, and certainly Stephen Delane sounds a lot to me like he has a very similar... Now, if you're British and I've got it completely wrong and he sounds nothing like a Northern accent, I apologize. But when I hear Delane talk as Stannis, I think it sounds very similar to how, Jon and how Ned talked. So the Stormlanders, somehow they have the same accent despite being thousands of miles apart.
And also the idea that he's a, long-term in the Bolton service, as a clearly knows Reek.
He knows Ramsay. He knows Ramsay, but at the same time, who the hell is Jon Snow?
Yeah.
I think I actually will buy the idea that he's not supposed to be a Northman. I just don't know about the idea of it being so far afield. But I guess the idea is that he is a sellsword who in the last 5 years, the last 6 years, has ended up in the North and employed by and become important and has known Ramsay in that time. But he's not a native Northman. Because I would think if you're a native Northman, somewhere in the last 20 years, somebody would have mentioned, oh, Lord Stark's bastard, Jon Snow.
Probably.
I mean, I think, especially when you're part of his noble household, I think you would hear about it.
Yeah.
But, so now we've got this sort of dilemma, or this sort of foreshadowing of a real problem, because Locke was sent, to find where Bran and Rickon are and get rid of them. And Ramsay says, and Jon Snow himself might be a problem if he decides. I mean, he's got the vows, but they're really cynical about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So now he wants to get rid of Jon. And Jon's unaware that this guy who he's friendly with really wants to get rid of him. So it's an interesting turn, I think. I don't mind this particular aspect because it's funny. It's clearly inspired by something that happens in A Feast for Crows, where we have a similar plot develop of an infiltration of a Night's Watch to murder Jon. So let's get over to discussing now Cersei and Jaime, because this is obviously after last week's episode, a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion, a lot of argument over what was there, what wasn't there, which we've discussed in our review and elsewhere, our take on it, on what we believe is the most consistent way to read what the producers and the writers and the director and the actors meant to have happen, which was they aimed for something that was darker than what was in the book, which George R. R. Martin says is consensual.
Yeah.
They want something a little more ambiguous, and obviously they made a big mistake in how they presented that. They really didn't present it clearly, and there's a gap between the intention behind the scene and the perception of the scene and sort of the wider public.
Which means that this week we had a problem, or rather a lot of people who watched the episode probably had a problem in that they were not seeing the ramifications that they were expecting to see from the scene last week. I mean, we never really expected it to be dealt with in any particular way, given that we sort of feel that we know what they were trying to do, and this scene follows up well on what they were trying to do, but not necessarily what a lot of people felt that they ended up doing. But I feel it's completely unrealistic for, like, a lot of reviewers went out and immediately after episode 3, oh, well, this will be fine, I suppose, if they, deal with it in a good way next week. And I feel that was very disingenuous of them. It's very disingenuous. Because they would know that
the show is done.
This is done. This is all in the can. They can't do anything about it. And their intentions clearly did not match up with the perceived end result. So how can you expect it to be addressed in the way you want it to be addressed?
It's creating, I think, sad to say, I think some of these journalists are sort of aiming to set up mock outrage later when it's not dealt with. I felt that is a little low of them. I mean, the worst thing I saw was the Telegraph in the UK had a blog quote where it says, and the headline is George R. R. Martin, quote, "I did not discuss rape scene with producers," unquote. And I looked, and that's George's post in LiveJournal. He doesn't use the term rape scene. In fact, he never uses the word rape at all. He's very circumspect in how he deals with it.
Yeah.
So there, I even asked, I actually went in the comments like, "Oh, I don't see that quote. Is it anywhere?" There's no response and there's no retraction. So it's very disingenuous, and a lot of people are
playing up the drama sort of and using the opportunity. This is, a big name show. There's a lot of attention, and everyone wants to get in. And...
So, I mean, there's a lot to discuss around it. I mean, there's just in the terms of the continuum of sexuality of relationships that Jaime and Cersei has. It's complicated. It is complex. I don't think it can be judged necessarily in the same way as you would judge a healthy, normal...
I mean, it's unhealthy, I feel, or we feel that it is an unhealthy relationship. Not necessarily because there is a level of sort of power games between them, but because of the circumstances. They're like, a couple of alcoholics or drug addicts having a relationship in the sense that everything around them is screwed up. There are situations where they're able to have sexual relations are screwed up in general.
It's pretty screwed up in the sense that it's a secret, and everything is secretive about them. So when Jaime comes in, I mean, he's a little more formal, and she's drunk, but we've seen that she's been getting progressively
they
lighter.
They played up the whole season so far. That
from the first episode.
He points it out when he gets drinking.
So they've been setting this up, that she's drinking more as a way to cope with the pressure she's feeling.
Which is something that they're introducing earlier than we start
seeing it happening in the books.
It is part of it. They're playing up her disenfranchisement by Tywin. I think by the fact that he's moving her out of the way and making her less of a player.
Yeah.
So it's partly that, and also Joffrey being more self-assertive. She had less of a role, and now in this previous episode, Tommen is sort of snatched away, and she can see it. I don't any hopes I have of Tony Tommen. My father is going to make sure it doesn't happen. I love the camera work in this particular scene. I mean, Michelle McLaren, is back from. She filmed one episode last season, I believe, and now she's filmed 2 this season. She's filmed 4 and 5 actually back to back. So I love particularly the shot from the bed when you see them neatly sort of separated by the width of the bed, basically, and it's a great sort of composition. And McLaren is she's done Breaking Bad and a bunch of other things. She is definitely one of the best working in the business, and it's a credit to a show that they have her on board. But it's a good, solid scene. I think I enjoyed Jaime's interaction with Cersei. I enjoy seeing, obviously, as power is slipping, she's asserting it in whatever way she can. So I want for Kingsguard and being very tough on him.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, I mean, there is obviously a tension between them, but it's, I think it has more to do with the death of Joffrey and her situation in general, as opposed to the events that we saw in the last episode. So that it's more to do with her general when she wants Tommen protected. Yeah. She's upset about the fact that Sansa Stark has slipped away and all of these things. So
things are kind of spiraling out of control from her perspective.
Yeah.
When speaking of protecting Tommen and Kingsguard, what? Kingsguard? Margaery and Tommen.
Yeah, apparently the Kingsguard aren't all that great because, actually Cersei said four men,
yes. But anyway, she manages to get by them.
Yes.
I don't know if we're to take, you can take the very rude reading one will want to take, but one could take the reading that maybe the indication she knows of some of the secret passages in the Red Keep and has used one of those to get by them.
Yeah.
Let's get
That's
by
not my
that.
reading.
It's not your reading.
Olenna did say she was very, very good.
The scene is surprisingly more decorous.
Yes, which is why I think that maybe Olenna's very, very good applied to the Kingsguard instead.
Well, it is more decorous than what I expected. We have 2 fairly recent vintage shows which dealt with some more topics of women seducing much younger youths. Borgia's had it with the sibling Jeffrey, I think.
Yeah.
Or Giovanni, being married to Sansa.
Yeah.
By the way, I recall years ago someone said, hey, do you think George based Joffrey and Sansa off of this
the names
Borgia and the Sansa of Aragon? Yeah. So that's kind of cool. But where they get married and this little 12-year-old boy is in bed and she gets naked in front of him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have I think it's the first season of Rome where they have I don't even remember the name of the woman, but there's a young patrician's son who gets to pick who gets to fight to the death or whatever, and she ends up joining him in the bath or whatever. And so I expected them to have her.
Wasn't that Spartacus actually?
Did I say what did I
You
say?
said Rome.
I meant Spartacus.
Yes.
I meant Spartacus. Thank you very much. But that's what I meant, anyways. Yes. So I had expected them to go that far,
especially when they aged up Tommen.
When they
I thought
aged
that
up
was part
Tommen,
of the reason, because in the books Tommen is 8, 9.
Yeah.
Which obviously Margaery would not be getting into bed with a 9-year-old Tommen. That's not.
No, not in that way. Well, you know, she did suggest that they could sleep together after they get married. But it's sort of decorously, like he's too young. It's not any. But the basic idea is there for the book as well from A Feast for Crows, that she's trying to build a relationship with him, and make sure that his mother doesn't have too much control. Yeah. So
and hey, we get Sir Pounds.
And we get Sir Pounds, which is a wonderful little nod to the books there, I thought. A very not the cute little sort of kitten.
No, it was quite the monster cat, actually.
Yeah, sort of a tomcat with big tails on. But it was nice. Sir Pounds is one of the 2, I think it's 2 cats that Tommen, or is it 3 cats that young Tommen has in the book. And he wants Sir Pounds to outlaw beats for him and so on. It's a cute little running thing with he is such a cute kid, and obviously they're
unlike Caligula, he's probably not going to name the cat to the small council or anything.
No, probably not. Joffrey, another story. Of course, Joffrey didn't care for the cats. So I thought that went fine. I think as the basic concept of her trying to start adding chains of her own, tying herself to him by our little secret it's making him. Now the thing I don't get is the sense that it's presented as if, well, you have to do this to win Tommen's interest so that he will be able to make sure that he marries you rather than his mother stopping it from happening. Like, Tywin is going to marry Tommen to whoever he wants.
Yes, she should probably be working on Tywin.
She should be working on Tywin is the thing. So
obviously if Tommen was... It's more once after the fact it makes sense in the books, when they are already set to be, because then making sure that he likes her and is going to prefer her over his mother and listen to her, but actually getting the marriage sorted out. But maybe this ties into the whole Olenna story, where apparently in the Game of Thrones canon of Westeros, men go around proposing to women without necessarily sorting it out with the head of their family first.
Yeah. So that worked pretty well. Brienne and Jaime, which is, I think, worked really well. It's very much from the book, I think, for the most part. Brian Cogman kind of compressed and changed around little details. Like, for example, the reading from the passage of Jaime's entry is done by Brienne, emphasizing the point that basically the entry is very short. And it's a little shorter than in the book. In the book, actually, Barris and Selmy did deign to write a couple of entries about his escorting Cersei to King's Landing to marry Robert, how he won the wedding tourney. But for the most part, he skipped bothering. He just said,
if he didn't have to put it in, he didn't.
Yeah. So there's a bit of that, and still Jaime realized the bad he's done doesn't very much outweighs the good, and he has an opportunity here to start building a legacy, kind of redeeming himself, which is interesting because in the Rolling Stone magazine interview, George discusses the topic of redemption, and he says he doesn't offer any answers, but he always wonders how do you see redemption? Can you be redeemed after you've done something terrible? He does a fantastic actually analogy to Woodrow Wilson, the president. With the idea that this was a unmitigated racist. He was essentially a supporter of the Ku Klux Klan and everything but name. And yet, at the same time, he had this dream of the League of Nations and, the war to end all wars. He had this hope that he could make a lasting worldwide peace. And, imagine it didn't work. World War II and everything else proved that. But imagine if it had. Would you have statues to him saying, and then you say, here's the man who, brought us a world without war. He was a racist. How do you deal with that? So it's interesting that he discusses it with Jaime. How do you deal? Did he do? Is he a bad person? Is he always going to be a bad person? Is he a good person who did bad things? Will he ever outweigh the bad with good, so people, the legacy will be that he was on the whole a good guy. It's all very interesting subject, and
obviously it becomes more personally focused, the whole thing around the Kingsguard, since on the show they haven't really managed to build up the Kingsguard to sort of the storied institution of heroic, legendary figures, and which have very much been ruined by Jaime's actions. And by this time in the books, Jaime is starting to feel very responsible for the state of the Kingsguard, and he wants to bring them back to their former glory. Yeah. So it becomes much more personal just about Jaime, since the rest of the Kingsguard is rather a nameless and faceless organization at this point.
Other than Meereen Trent, we don't have...
Yeah, you don't really have a sense of their legacy.
Yeah. It's nice that they've added a little bit, just reading Arthur Dane's entry, for example. But that said, I think on the whole, I kind of like the interaction, of course. The naming of a sword, by the way, in the book is actually, Jaime says he'd like Brienne to call it Oathkeeper. So that was actually his idea, and they decided to change it. So if she does it, I think it works just as well to have her kind of...
Well, I mean, I think Jaime actually volunteering the name shows him taking that step and taking that responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's still
showing, I'm giving it to you so that you can try and keep my oath.
Yeah.
For me, I'm entrusting you with this responsibility.
Ah, I see. No, I could see that.
But yeah,
maybe it would have been better for him too.
So I think it would have been stronger from sort of Jaime's arc.
Fair enough.
But it's a fairly minor point.
Yeah, and the other bit, of course, is we have that Podrick joins her right off. In the book, he ends up kind of following after her on his own. And here we have, it works fairly neatly having, because Jaime's here much earlier, or rather Tyrion's fully aware of his presence, he kind of foists him on Jaime, and Jaime
to make sure that he gets out safely and so on.
So that works pretty well. And I like having giving him the axe, for example. That was kind of a cute touch.
But they should not have told the actor to try quite so hard at writing badly.
Yeah. Let's see who's next. Sam and Jon. Now, we have been quite praiseful of the Castle Black stuff, and I some people seem to not really much like the Gilly and Sam stuff. I really like John Bradley.
I mean, I can't say that I would like John Bradley. I can't say that I'm a huge fan, because it feels like of her addition sort of in what they're doing with her, but I've been okay with it.
Yeah, but I like John Bradley's performance, so when he's interacting with John, it's great.
Yeah.
But
this scene
starts to feel
very on the nose.
Well, it's very obvious about twisting the plot around to create a new scenario, and the idea, I mean, realistically speaking, I know that the characters move as plot dictates.
But it becomes a little too obvious here.
Yes.
Because the idea, I noticed this in particular when I worked on the text here, that the pointing out that, oh, well, Bran, they've gone north, and where, how far can they get, Cripple being pulled by, Hodor and all of that on his sled. Well, they could seek shelter in wildling villagers, but they're all abandoned. They're all with man. So why? They know. They've told Sam that they need to go somewhere north. They're not north of the wall to hide from someone and just find some village to hang out in. They're going somewhere specific. Why would they be sheltering in villages? In fact, why would they want to run into anyone?
Exactly. I mean,
so why would they be looking in particular to go to Craster's Keep?
No, because to me it sounds fantastic. I'm traveling
abandoned
north.
Villages, awesome.
Free shelter, no one's going to bother us. No wildlings around, no one's going to bother us. Fantastic. It's very.
In fact, that's part of it in the books, that they are able to travel as they do.
Because they're so empty.
Because it's so empty.
So it's such a specious argument, and it's so obvious. I'm afraid it's really obvious. Yeah. Sorry, Brian. Sorry, writers. It's too clear. And also just the simple logic of they come out at Night's Watch here, and Craster's Keep is over here, and suddenly they're gonna...
Night Fort.
What did I say?
You said the Night's Watch.
The Night's Fort. The Night Fort is where they came out from the wall, and they veer off to the east to get to Craster's Keep.
That's not to go north.
That's not to really to go north. And here's the other thing. How in the world do we know about Craster's Keep? Do they have a map and a compass? Do they have a GPS telling them this is the direction to Craster's Keep?
So and by the way, Craster's Keep is not abandoned. Yeah, it's like
it's baffling. It's really super baffling. They could have just left out all that. I mean, if they didn't give that bit, you'd think, well, they got lost, or the woods or the haunted forest was so impassable, but they've kept going east and
but
east.
actually making it sound like they'd aim for that, and then having Locke walk in right then and say basically lead up to the next scene where Alistair Thorne is allowing you to take your expedition.
Yeah, there's no two ways about how silly that is. I mean, I like the whole having Jon. I mean, Jon's already speaking up, and okay, there is one other problem, which is the other topic that this turns on is, if Mance gets hold of him, he knows we don't have 1,000 men.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because Mance Rayder was a member of a Night's Watch. He knows there aren't 1,000 men on the wall. It's very weak reasoning, and basically I can understand.
And they sort of, I think, vaguely almost Jon or somebody realized that because they add the part about, well, think about it this way, the Lord Commander was like our father, we have to avenge him, which is sort of the thing that they were just speaking out against.
Yeah, we shouldn't be vengeance.
We shouldn't be avenging people right now. We should be protecting the wall. So it doesn't work, unfortunately. It's a plot that they felt that they needed to do for some reason.
Well, the some reason I was going to get into is obviously they feel like they have to fill in time. Jon has arrived a little bit too early. The situation they've painted is a little less dire. Like, it's less immediate. Like, when Jon arrives, like, right after, there's trouble. And here, there's this long delay. They've thrown this in to create some tension dilemma in the middle of the season.
But it's obvious that it's thrown in.
But it feels very obviously thrown in.
There's no elegance to this plotting at all.
It's not elegant. It's very like, well, we just need to fit in time.
I mean, the whole thing is a change that Jon even knows that obviously that Bran is beyond the wall. I mean, it is absolutely right that if he had known, this was just why Bran in the books tells Sam, don't tell Jon because he will try to come after me. So it's absolutely correct that Jon would try. Probably even if he was standing there at one moment and saying, no, we can't go. When it comes to his brother, he's probably going to rethink that again. But when you put all these things together, it's not elegant at all.
No, it's not. So that's a shame. I mean, I don't have I wish a more elegant way at least could have come up with this. I think better still, I think maybe they should have come up with some...
They should have delayed Jon's...
I mean, certainly Jon's arrival should not have been at the end of that. He should have maybe arrived like... They could have picked up the first episode of Ygritte attacking him, and then he could have stumbled in like the second episode, and then they could...
Or even the third.
It's a little much imagining when people are zooming around as they are.
Yes, but the second episode had so much else here, remember? They could easily have skipped him.
Yeah, they could have skipped him. I suppose it's possible, but that's as long as they could delay it.
It is true.
But that might have been enough to kind of say, well, we don't need to do this part.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's very obvious what they're doing, and the seams are showing in what they're doing. So it feels too much of an artifice. They've done new plots that sort of fit in fairly smoothly into the show previously, but this one feels like they were running out of ideas for how to do it, and they just picked, well, Craster's Keep, bad guys, let's say Bran goes there, let's say Jon knows, let's say Jon goes there, watch what happens. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously Locke, I really didn't discuss him. He finally arrives from the Dreadfort after being sent in there.
Well, we did discuss him earlier.
Did he show up in the earlier episode?
Yes.
Was it the third episode?
No, but we discussed him previously. The fact that...
Oh, yes, sorry. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
So that means we can then move on to Craster's Keep, of course. Now, visually as a component, and just from the performance of Bern Gorman as Carl Tanner, which is a bit of an odd one because I think Tanner is not really a last name in Westeros. It's a sort of mocking name applied to somebody. But let's go beyond that. Let's not really get into this.
Yeah.
I like the performance of his complete psychopath. Those dead eyes he has. He's somebody you can end up picking when you want somebody criminal. He does it really well, and it's really amazingly shot. I think it's very, to me, like Apocalypse Now, Colonel Kurtz. It's very dark. It's very apocalyptic. It's very scary. It's really well done by Michelle O'Halloran. I heard cinematographer, I think, actually was interviewed about it, saying how they came up with some really wild ideas for what to show in these scenes that they shoot. And, I think David and Dan were calling their the mad guys from Canada or something, but they were insane for the things they were getting away with. And, it's a very dark scene. And I fear, obviously, a little bit of how people are going to react after the last episode's reading of, rape as a story, and then you have lots of rape, gratuitous rape in the background of a scene to emphasize how evil and messed up this place is.
I hated the scene myself, not necessarily because of the violence and such, although, I mean, I'm not a fan of Apocalypse Now. That's not my sort of thing. I don't watch those sort of movies, so it's I don't like that mood in general. I found that essentially making this Carl character, he's sort of like a point of view character, a sort of mini point of view in this section, and I was very troubled by the fact that usually when that's done in the books, there are some mitigating elements to the story that sort of explain how did this person, where are they coming from? Why are they such a horrible person? We have these one-off point of views as prologues and such, and some of them aren't always nice people. But you tend to get some sense of where they're coming from, and that sort of more grounds it in A Song of Ice and Fire for me. Here you just seem to have, it's like having a point of view from, like the books had a point of view chapter from Gregor Clegane, and I very much doubt that George would do that, but if he did it, he would probably try and give us a sense of who this character is, and here he is just this real sort of badass, braggart, violent, unpleasant person. I found it hard to see as a part of the series in that sense. It just didn't feel thematically right for me.
Well, you could instead see that Rast is the point of view and he's witnessing this. Because Rast feels much more like...
I tried to see that in the second viewing, but the camera, for the most part, is much too close on Carl.
Yeah, he looms very large in the scene, and I think...
If Rast was the point of view, if it was a little more removed from Carl, I think for me it would have worked better.
That's interesting, because I mean, obviously one of the things the camera does and the show does is it's not bound to any point of view structure.
No, but here it really feels like he's very much the focal point.
Yeah.
It really feels like this is all about him. You start with a close-up of him drinking from the skull and all of that. It just feels so about him. More than some scenes that are about point of view characters. That's what troubled me. It's so much his scene.
Yeah.
It fell out of place.
Not very true. Yeah. And other things we see here, they have Ghost, who disappeared somewhere. And Jon...
And apparently somebody managed to trap a direwolf without mostly killing it and mostly killing themselves.
Who knows how many men died kind of wrestling it in a cage.
Yeah, but he didn't look particularly injured either.
Well, Carl probably told them, any man who hurts it, I'll kill them.
Yeah, well, how do you stuff a direwolf into a cage?
I have no answer to that one. I'm not sure if the producers really have one.
No, I think they just realized that we kind of lost Ghost along the way.
Well, it is true, because the main thing I've realized, thinking about when we see him, it's great that they're going to somehow bring the direwolf back. I mean, I'm glad of that.
Yes.
But all through the third season, I mean, Jon doesn't really think of him.
He doesn't think about him.
Doesn't say anything about him.
No.
Nothing. It's sort of forgotten, because I think the last time they're together is in the second season, just before we come across Ygritte and company, that he chases Ygritte, and the direwolf is nowhere to be found, does not help them, lead them to him, isn't there after Corwin and company are captured and killed, or some of them are killed and Corwin is captured, isn't there at all, doesn't find Jon again at all. And obviously, there is a reason for this. And the reason for this is Iceland. They can't go and get those dogs there.
No. It's like you can't take horses, you can't take dogs, and you can't take any animals, I think, into Iceland. So,
and basically, yes, they composite the wolves. It's absolutely true they composite the wolves into scenes now. But it's easier, I guess, for them to occasionally have them on sets and basically
have something to work with.
Something to work with a little bit. I think that's what they do, anyways. Because I that's the only reason I can think of for the whole Iceland thing. It's too difficult. So yeah, it's nice how they're bringing it back, but there's a lot of convenience happening here, because then you have, of course, Bran and company come across them, and I love the camera work again with showing Summer's perspective as he takes them. I mean, that's really fantastic. They just happen across the Craster's Keep,
and for some reason they have another trap set up to catch more direwolves. Next,
I have no. Yeah, what is that trap for?
Well, apparently there's a lot of direwolves wandering around in the woods.
Yeah. It's a bit. There's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot of
coincidences. And I understand, but they kind of have to answer like, okay, wait a second, but what about Summer? Won't Summer be a problem? Or
I mean, these are the sort of things that, if we're looking at how people discuss the books, these are the sort of things that would be picked apart, ripped apart on the forum, wouldn't you say? These sort of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
It would be completely ripped apart for anyone discussing the plot in the books, and I don't feel that. I feel it's very shoddy that things like that should get into the TV show when there's just, it should be held to the same standards. Yeah. They really should try a little harder there.
And now we come to the last scene of the episode, and this is, if you took anyone's advice, maybe skip this last scene, you should stop here. Thanks for watching, and we're going to go into it now because it is we think maybe a spoiler. In a way, it is definitely a spoiler, but it's not. It's a minor spoiler.
It was enough to upset me. I can say that because it confirms something that hasn't yet been confirmed in the books. Yeah, so this is our first.
But that's a minor part. Where the major part is maybe what it shows may have more significant spoiler implications. So we'll go on to that. Obviously, we get the White Walker. Yeah. Traveling with the child. And this is the image I think some people, we even were thrown off when we first saw it. We thought this was actually Cold Hands, the figure from the books. But no, it is this White Walker taking a child, the last son of Craster, into the heart of winter. Yeah,
riding across this icy plain and coming across this...
The Aurora Borealis above it.
And all these sort of spiky ice structures.
Yes, which I mean, I remember... when Bran dreams in the books, when he's still in a coma, he dreams himself flying, and he flies towards the heart of winter, far to the north, where he sees the bodies of dreamers impaled on icy spikes. So it's got a bit of that. And so this walker drops the child onto this icy pillar, and
there's a circle of icy spikes around
it. And there's a number of black-clad walkers, and one of them comes forward, and he has bumps on his head that kind of look big, like they might say just a crown or something, a leadership role, or maybe he's just a sorcerer among the others. I don't know, but my take on it is he is turning that infant into a walker.
Yeah, I mean, he touches it with his nail, and there's a crackling sound, and it's sort of like he's freezing the child, and then it opens its eyes, and they're all blue.
Yeah. So that now I have 100% believe that this is what happens. Yeah. They take the children. I mean, in the books it's hinted.
And we even talk about how the sons are
coming.
The Craster sons are coming back, and
the cold gods, and they do worship. They kind of worship the walker. They call them the gods, but they believe their sons have become walkers. And we actually complained in the second season when they actually showed a walker grabbing it, because in the book it's left like, is it true or not? Yeah. And obviously it's believed to be true, but so we believed it to be true. It's just it's weird to see it confirmed, not in the book, but here. The bigger implication is, well, is there a king? Is there a leadership council? Is there some sort of control of the others?
Obviously, we've had from George previously saying that the others don't really have
a culture.
I mean, because people commented, I think this was in relation to the first season where we got them with their artistic
that's right,
horse and human body decorations in the snow. And
that's exactly what he has. He doesn't know if it'd be right to say that they have a culture, which is fascinating. Like, it suggests that they are, I mean, they have language, and obviously, I mean, we hear them talk in the first episode, and certainly in the book. Yeah, they speak and they laugh and they have icy armor and such. So I mean, they have a material culture, and they have
but that they have a society
But
of
they
some
have
kind,
proper
a structure
society that
of,
is that.
yeah.
So it is.
That may be an invention.
That may be an invention. It might be. It's very. It's a question basically of what did David and Dan ask George about the others? Like, who are they? What are they? Where do they come from? Who leads them? Did they go down that far, or have they just kind of assumed?
We have our speculations about the others, but
yes.
Quite
But did they assume certain things and just go with that? So it's actually going to be kind of interesting to see how it plays out. But at the same time, this could be a big, fat Winds of Winter sort of spoiler about, oh yeah, there are kings and rulers and leaders among them. In the grand scheme of things, that may not be so important a spoiler. I mean, but it's just like a big detail to learn about this enemy.
But if you really want to, like, I would prefer to learn everything first from the books rather than the show, then yeah, we may be getting to the point now where some material starts sneaking in that.
So, obviously for you below has the twisting of a story, like, and it's so obvious that they need to get to this point because they decided that they needed to invent some material to fill in. I think they're just looking to fill in time between.
This was on the whole an episode where I basically got gradually more and more angry as I watched it, and by the end there were almost things being thrown. So
some steam maybe coming out of your ears. I don't think anything was being thrown, but you're
well, I
fuming.
did get up and pace around a bit.
You were fuming.
Yes,
it's absolutely true. She was fuming at it. I shook my head, and it's the point because
it's certainly for me it's much weaker than the first three.
Yeah. I can see that. I definitely, and it's not really. I hasten to add, and Brian Cogman. I've loved his work. I think he's written some of the best episodes. I thought, What Is Dead May Never Die, a fantastic episode. Kissed by Fire,
which is partly why something like the Margaery and Olenna surprises me as being in his episode.
It was more disappointing.
Yeah.
Of course, we never really know who is the final responsible person for any scene, really, until they say, because David and Dan have a role and scenes get shuffled around from between episodes. So we don't really fully know, but a little disappointed. I have very high hopes. Now, Brian has one other episode, the 6th episode, and that one looks like it's going to be really significant. So fingers crossed that one kind of hits the mark. But this is it. In the end, it's another sort of solid episode. Like you wouldn't go and most people wouldn't.
I wouldn't call this one solid.
Fine. Okay, I'll call it solid, but it's sort of on the weaker side.
Nice.
Well, I like being forgiving, which may be a damning phrase there. But I feel like we're trying, and if things are silly. The things with Olenna and Margaery have kind of been silly the entire time. Like, unrealistic. Olenna has felt so not of the setting with the way she talks about things. I don't buy it. I don't buy that she's a character who fits in Westeros. That said, and this stuff here, like, they are cornered a little bit, and they feel like they have to have this material to spend more time with Jon and Bran. But at the same time, you can say, well, but it is all false dilemma. Like, they're literally conjuring out of thin air, and that's a shame.
It just doesn't stand up.
But it's not like he's
scrutiny as
no,
the rest of the plot.
but that's not necessarily actually. It's not even Brian's fault. This is part of what the producers plot out.
Breakdown of this season and such. But
he's a part of that process. So sorry, Brian. I liked it.
I'm ruthless in this whole thing that I really don't think they should be so hung up on. Oh, we have to have X amount of this character, X amount of that character. Fine, maybe you have a minimum that each actor is going to demand, but often that they are giving certain characters more than that minimum, and I just think that they should be a bit more ruthless about that and serve the plot and not the characters.
Yeah, I can see the argument, but I mean, Jon has to have leadership moments building up towards.
Certainly his speech and the way he gets people to follow him there is fine as a moment.
I think if they had just used, we have to avenge Mormont.
Yeah.
And they hadn't used I'm trying to see if Bran's there. If they hadn't done those convolutions, I would be perfectly happy. But because they kind of felt But then
they should have spent the time beforehand with having Jon speak out against, we can't
No, absolutely, that's the thing. They can't.
So they paint themselves into corners.
Yes, they can't have it both ways, and that's a shame that they do that. They should have fought it through because it feels kind of screenwriting 101. Like, everything has to fit together into a neat little convergence.
Yeah.
Because, we all love coincidence, but not when your thumb is on the scale. We can see that you're forcing the characters in weird directions.
Yeah, there
to
were
get
several
them.
thumbs there, and they were really pressing hard.
So, that's us mixing our metaphors. That's why we are not screenwriters. But in any case, but that said, it's eminently watchable, unless you're one of those people who starts fuming and starts throwing things at the screen.
There was far too much Margaery and Cersei for it to be classified as entirely watchable for me.
So it goes. But those are our highs and lows, and that's our thoughts on the episode. And obviously, we are coming up now to the next episode, whose title is escaping me at the moment.
First of his name.
First of his name. Is it first of his name? Wasn't the fourth episode
Fourth episode we just
Oathkeeper.
did Oathkeeper.
Yes, first of his name is
So
next episode.
Next week we'll be back to cover first of his name.
Which obviously refers to Tommen. So I expect you'll to see more of Tommen. I don't know if this could be right off he'll be asserting his interest in marrying Margaery, for example. I think it must do a lot with him to have that title, I would think. So it'll be interesting to see what there is to discuss, and I think hopefully the whole Craster's Keep stuff at least ends up as interesting television, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense.